Today is the day for our webinar, and our webinar is dedicated to cultural planning for cultural places. So this event is taking place in cooperation with Danish Cultural Institute in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and the URB Cultural Planning Interreg project. Cultural planning is now one of the most employed methods in the work towards social innovation, inclusion, participation, and capacity building. Sounds already promising, I guess. It promotes equal involvement in developing better neighborhoods and suburban areas from, in most cases, three stakeholders: the decision makers in municipalities or the authorities, residents that also might include private and public sector, and artists that might include individual players, but also cultural facilities and organizations. And in recent years, cultural planning has proven to be crucial to many European capitals of culture, so keep that in mind. And also it has been proven to be crucial to other urban and even rural areas to make places better for living. And I believe all of the speakers are here. I believe that is here, and I believe you heard everything I said, so no bad comments appeared in the chat section. So that's good, you hear me too. And before we go down to the regular program that will consist of 3 speakers, I'd like to give a word to Ms. Tatze Malmbade, the member of the European Parliament and Vice Chair of the Committee on Culture and Education, also the hostess of this webinar series and hostess of the series today, of the event today. So Tatze is here. How are you feeling?
Yes. Good morning to everyone. So I'm very happy to greet you again. I really feel very delighted that we are able to continue the series of our seminars devoted to the program of European Capital of Culture. Today I'm truly happy that one more very strong partner has been joining our preparatory work in an advisory and expert capacity, but who knows, maybe some of you will manage also to build more stronger links with cultural institutes in Latvia in further developing of your programs. So maybe a couple of words about about the UNIC, or European Union of National Institutes for Culture. So the UNIC is a European network of organizations engaging in cultural relations, and currently UNIC organization operate in more than 19 countries. As an advocate for culture and its prominent role in international relations, UNIC is a strong partner for European Union institutions, including European Parliament. And considering a significant, and we consider truly UNIC a significant partner in building cultural policies at the European level. But looking from the national perspective at the work cultural institutions has done so far in Latvia, I have to say that my experience says that these institutions and really have helped to bring in some fresh ideas into Latvian cultural life, into cultural policy. For instance, I remember, so it was already a long time ago, I think it was the year 2004, something that in the collaboration with Danish Culture Institute, we actually were quite the pioneers in developing a creative industries concept in Latvia. And then with the help of British Council, we organized the first researches on that. So today, creative industries concept seems something very usual, but if we look some years back, it was something very innovative. So, and I believe that these seminars also probably will bring some innovative, novel ideas into our strategies for for European culture capital. Today, we are going step by step to explore notion of culture planning. So, from my understanding, the notion of culture planning is closely linked to the so-called cultural turn emerging in the 70s, 80s of the last century, along with more functional planning for culture, for arts. Concept of cultural planning viewed the role of culture in the broader development context. It was a so-called, or it could be like a call for more creative approach in development as such. It was more values oriented. It brought together culture, environment, and identity. In the urban planning, the notion of cultural planning went hand in hand with concept of creative city that extended the cultural planning to the creative industries, issues of placemaking, design, and sustainability. At the same time, UNESCO and other international institutions like Council of Europe and European Union strongly tied the cultural planning with sustainable development concept. So, and as I am also a great fan of UNESCO, because I have spent some time also working in that organization, I, at the end of my intervention, like to quote UNESCO. Culture in sustainable development is not only about using artists to raise concern on climate change or about building cultural venues that are efficient in the use of energy and natural resources. It is not only about the income that cultural industries can bring to the economy. It is not about asking more to the culture circles. These are very important questions that need to be addressed, but they don't articulate the core question. The role of culture in sustainable development is mainly about including a cultural perspective in all public policies. It is about guaranteeing that any sustainable development process has a soul. And this is a core question. So it's coming from UNESCO. Probably we could say that the main idea of culture planning is bring a soul into each step of city planning. So, and how to do it, and what are the good answers, what is a good experience? I hope this seminar will give us some ideas on that, and I hope we will have very fruitful day and discussion on that.
Thank you, Dace, for your introductory speech, but it's not over because we have a next introductory speech from Amelie Sorensen, and she's representing the Danish Cultural Institute in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. So, Amelie, where are you?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. And thank you for the words. As Martin says, my name is Amelie Sorensen, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Danish Cultural Institute in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And I'm very happy to be a part of welcoming you to this webinar on cultural planning for cultural places. And we're of course very happy that Dace and Culture Lab invited us, all of the institutions and institutes in the UNIC Latvia cluster, to be a part of this project. And we hope that you will learn a lot in the next hour and a half. The Danish Cultural Institute has been the lead partner of URB Cultural Planning for the last 2 years, working with cultural resources and creativity as the foundation for citizen-driven cooperation and solutions for urban development. And today we're very much looking forward to share some of the things we have learned with you. And we hope you will enjoy hearing about us and about urban cultural planning, as well as about the development and the evaluation and wrapping up of Aarhus, the second biggest Danish city as European Capital of Culture in 2017. So I just want to say thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much to Emils and Trevor Davis and Hans Peter Dein for joining us today. And I don't think I will say anymore. I'll just pass the word back to Martins and stay and listen in.
Thank you, Amelie. Thank you, Datse. We are ready to begin. Just a few technical notes. If you have any questions during the presentation, you are welcome to share them via the chat section. And if, of course, there is a needy question, a needy comment, we can give you a word in live. When speaking about off live, it would be great that you turned off your microphones. I think all of the microphones are already off, but also turn off your videos for better streaming abilities. And I think we're ready to start. We have the first contestant of proving that cultural planning works. And it's Emil Struade, a specialist in strategy, design, and innovation, and also a project expert at Urban Cultural Planning Interreg project. And his presentation will be titled Cultural Planning as a Method for Urban Social Innovation. So Emils will try to introduce us with the urban cultural planning activities. And when preparing for this event, I Googled cultural planning jokes, but I realized there are no cultural planning jokes that I can tell you now. They're only planning jokes. So maybe Emils, by the end of this presentation, can share an anecdote from his experience, and we can finally have the first Google search of cultural planning jokes. Emils, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Martin. Yeah, so no jokes yet to start, but let's start on a serious note and get into jokes later. So I hope you can all see my screen now with the official starting page, and let's go. Cultural planning as a method for urban social innovation. And here to the subject. So we will be talking about a project called Urban Cultural Planning, or the long title is indeed Cultural Planning as a Method of Urban Social Innovation. And the project is part of the Interreg Baltic Sea Region program. It is a flagship project, and the lead partner is Danish Cultural Institute. And I'm a project expert in this project. So I just want to start on a maybe more polemical note and ask the question, what is the city made of? But I think a member of European Parliament, Datse Malbart, answered well that the answer is soul. Of course, the city is made of soul, but there are many things that could be a fitting answer. And what is this picture showing? It's actually a kind of image of an urban breakdown. This was spring 2019 when one of the major overpasses in Riga was closed due to fear of collapse, and all of a sudden the traffic was disrupted, and this bridge, Daglava Bridge, it was just there closed for road traffic, but suddenly it opened the possibilities for cyclists, pedestrians, for the citizens to occupy the bridge. And it, in a way, this infrastructural breakdown, it showed the possibilities or the emptiness which suddenly opens when things break down in the city. And it was still a year before the pandemic when, of course, many things sort of broke down. Many cities that the things that the city is made of all of a sudden could not be taken for granted. And, you know, things like public transport, which we thought it's a safe and healthy option, all of a sudden it became scary, or shopping became off limits in person. But at the same time, many other things which seemed impossible, like temporary bike lanes, all of a sudden it's a reality. So this is the time or the moment we are in. This pandemic, it's still raging, and yeah, we will see when the dust settles what will come of it. But to answer my own question, one of the possible answers that the city is made of, I think, is trust. And trust is it's a kind of social glue or social capital which exists also in Europe, not really equally distributed. And we can see that one country in Europe stands out as high trust society. So this is to answer the question, would you say that most people can be trusted? And Denmark says yes. Other Nordic countries say yes, kind of, but so many countries in Europe are not so high up there, including Latvia and Portugal. So there's still room for growth. And I would posit that cultural planning really helps build trust in cities, among citizens and municipalities and everyone involved with the cities. And I hope you you believe me by the end of this talk. So cultural planning, it started actually quite a long time ago with another project called Culturability BSR, which is an amalgam of culture and sustainability, and it was also a project executed by the Danish Cultural Institute back in 2013. It started, and or 14. Well, anyway, it's been a long way in preparation, and we were sort of considering the topics of culture and sustainability and trying to find the sort of the synergy. And this was one of the results, that actually urban cultural planning is such a field where culture and sustainability meet and overlap and sort of enrich each other. And speaking of cultural planning, the objectives are to, well, in sort of bureaucratic language, to advance the Baltic Sea region performance in citizens among themselves and citizen and city authorities cooperation, to include social innovation, inclusion, and sustainable development, and small and medium-sized communities, which includes city neighborhoods and also small towns, and to strengthen the capacity of cultural planning actors. And the image is from one of our partners from the city of Kiel in North Germany, which is a kind of illustration for city walks and exploration of this neighborhood. So you can see that we are already very creative. And the sort of tenets of cultural planning method are such that there are 5 steps and 3 key players. And it's important that these steps are sort of taken consciously and in a structured way. So it starts with identifying the neighborhood or town where we want to apply cultural planning. And usually in our project and otherwise, these neighborhoods that we choose, they're not very sort of prosperous, but on the contrary, they're somehow left behind due to maybe physical isolation or some cultural marginalization due to many immigrants or economic backwardness, or maybe it's spatially cut off from the rest of the city by industrial areas and so on. So usually it's a neighborhood where we can intervene and make a difference. Then the steps are cultural mapping, which is about understanding what is the soul of this place and what are the assets, the values. Here, then there is a community visioning process to create a common vision and shared view of the place. Then a common project is developed, and often it has to do with the use of public space. then there's an implementation with the local and other participants, and finally an anchoring or strategic sort of positioning of this project for continuation and for some kind of permanent place in this neighborhood. And importantly, there are three groups who are players in urban cultural planning, and these are citizens, intermediaries or NGOs or creative groups, and public authorities. And I think it's important to note that these groups are quite distinct and each has their own interests, you could say, and also their own ways of working and communicating and doing things. And I think it's correct that each of these groups should sort of stick to their guns and play their roles, you know, that the public authorities are interested to increase the value of the city, to increase investment, taxes. Citizens are interested in better quality of life, more safety, more sort of, yeah, just better lives in their neighborhoods. And the creative people are interested to be creative and express themselves creatively. And these identities, I think, are important. And also then what comes of the interplay of these three groups is a synergy and working together for a common goal. But this common goal has to be found. So, and that's the method. That's what is happening in cultural planning, that these three groups, which are quite maybe sometimes even opposed, that they're working together and building trust with each other. Well, and in practice, the cultural planning method has been and is being tested by us through 10 PSR demonstrator projects, as we call them, and they're all taking place in these sort of left behind or deprived neighborhoods in cities across the Baltic Sea. And usually the size of this community is 20,000 people or less because of the kind of critical mass or the possibility to make an impact on this neighborhood. And you can see the list of the places and neighborhoods. And of course, you can find more stories about these demonstrator projects on our website. And this diagram, it's an illustration from one of the demonstrator projects in Sarkandaugava in Riga, which is a sort of vision for the active neighborhood of Sarkandaugava, who are the players and how they should sort of cooperate and where. So, and what are we expecting of this project? We are expecting increased awareness and understanding and knowledge of the method of cultural planning in the Baltic Sea region, and also the capability to use this method as a tool in the process of urban regeneration at this very small neighborhood or small community level from a human cultural perspective, and with a focus on social inclusivity and sustainability. And then the question is, what is next for cultural planning? Well, this project is running from actually 2018 already, and we were supposed to finish already at the end of June this year, but because of the pandemic, we've gotten a prolongation of project timeline, so we will finish likely by the end of September this year. And there are still several urban labs planned in the project, which will take place in Kiel, Visaginas and Vilnius in Lithuania, in Kaliningrad in Russia, in Gullborgsund in Denmark, and in Pori, Finland, over spring and summer of this year. Unfortunately, it seems at least the first labs will be digital, and really we haven't had a live event for now more than a year, as in many of our other activities in the world. Well, then we are currently working actually on documenting and exhibiting the results of the project, so a much more sort of thorough reflection on the processes of cultural planning that have been taking place in the last 2.5 years, and we hope that this work will be ready also by something like autumn 2021. Then we have a final conference in Riga in September, dates to be announced. And as a legacy of this project, we are hoping to establish a more permanent network called Hubs of Excellence of the people who have been involved in this project and who are interested in the cultural planning method and who are well anchored in their cities and neighborhoods, also in the public administration, because these are the people who usually have resources to actually implement things. And we hope that if there is a call for Interreg PSR extension projects, then we have a little idea of our own to submit to Interreg PSR and to follow up with some activities perhaps for another year. And even off the record, I can say that we have some ideas also to extend this method further, not only to urban, but to small rural communities and rural areas. And we are working on a proposal to actually adapt and pilot this method in more rural areas. And as I said, you can find more news, events, and proceedings from our events and various toolbooks and kits at our website, urbcultural.eu, and you can follow us on Instagram and Facebook for live feeds. Well, I think that is all I have to say. Just a page with partner logos would be in place, and thank you for your interest. And I believe if there are some burning questions, I can take them now, or we can move on.
Thank you, Emils. I might have a few questions, but before we go down to them, I shared the urbcultural.eu website in the chat section, so you can copy the link and put it into your browser and see what it shows. And all of the materials that have been made possible through the project are available there. All of the news are there, and hopefully you find what you're looking for. I have a question, and actually I have two questions. And question number one is related to one of the previous slides that you showed, and it was about demonstrators. And did the demonstrators approach you to express their need to be part of the project, or it was a mutual interest, or were you looking for them as the organizers, or were the partners looking for them? How friendship was created?
It was also a creative process. Sometimes it was the partners who had these demonstrators in mind, and sometimes it was exactly the bottom up, that the demonstrators actually approached us and proposed themselves as a site for this project activity. So it was not in some of these cases there have been processes and some kind of interventions going on for years, like in Kiel, where there is a special project company which is dealing with this sort of problematic east bank of Kiel, this neighborhood. But in other cases, it was something which just came up during the project. So very different routes and also quite different trajectories that these demonstrators have been taken. And therefore, I'm also looking forward to sort of summarizing these experiences and reflecting on how these processes went and what we have learned through all this.
So it means it's crucial for the people or the organization or municipalities to implement cultural planning, not to wait for anything to happen, but also be ready to ask for possible demonstrators or partners, possible partners to be friends with them and not just wait with like folded hands and hopefully someone will show up. So it is a mutual process.
Well, hopefully this is a takeaway from this project, that this trust can be built between the communities, creative people like artists and designers and the city authorities, that even though each party has different goals and maybe approaches things differently, that things can happen and they can be sort of synergetic and beneficial for all. So, and I think, not to boast, but I think we're seeing some of this, that really things are starting to happen in our partner cities, which seemed not possible, but there's a lot more of this collaborative spirit. And even as a result, I'd like to say, of our project, some city activists have migrated to city administration, at least in Riga. Some of them became elected officials. So it is possible that these communities are also related, and they're mutually complementary. So activists can also be also in Gdańsk. Apparently, it happened.
So the last final little question from me. So if I am the bidder for the European Capital of Culture, or if I'm probably the winner and would like to implement cultural planning with the help of you, what should they do, and what can you probably offer, the first things that you can offer to help them? As the project leaders, or when the project is over, what else there is to expect for them?
Yeah, I think it's inevitable that the cultural capital of today cannot ignore the citizens who are living in the city. So this participatory approach will have to be part of it one way or another. But it's a question how, if you make it real, or if it's or we are still thinking of cultural capital in terms of more how to say it, this spectacular city, something with a surprise, with a fireworks and huge public sculptures or concerts. Of course, it's part of it, but you really have to listen to your citizens and involve them, because they have good ideas. They are living in the city and they are making this cultural capital real, not only some kind of spectacular events, but actually this participation of the citizens will make a legacy of this cultural capital. So, and yeah, we have done this. We've been doing these 10 demonstrators, and I think by now we have learned how to use this method, and we can also maybe give you some pointers as candidate cities, how you can incorporate this method as part of your application.
And then we have one final question from Zana Estere, and she's asking, how did you build and provide communication and continuity of a dialogue between all three key players during the process of project development and implementation? Therefore, citizens, art, and culture, and authorities.
Yeah, I think this question takes us probably to the next speaker. I think he can, Trevor Davis can answer much better, because he has been really closely day-to-day involved with these processes. So I give the microphone to him together with the question.
So probably this is a very good moment to introduce our next speaker. And if there are going to be any other questions, then of course we will try to answer them after Trevor, because both of the urban cultural planning and Trevor's work are connected. So Trevor Davies is an urban planner and a co-director of Metropolis, and it's a platform for art and performance in public space in Denmark. And he is also a former director of Copenhagen Cultural Capital of Europe and responsible for preparation of Aarhus, the European Capital of Culture, in 2017. Also the initiator of the Nordic Urban Laboratory. And so you all understand he's not only a cultural planner, but also very much professional when talking about cultural cities or capitals of culture in Europe. And he will continue Emil's line of expression, talking about the actual work on cultural planning, but he will focus on cultural capital of Europe, mind the gap, sort of knot or strain of this process. So Trevor Davies, you're welcome. And in case if you don't see the presentation in full screen for participants, please double click on the presentation and you will see it. Just a quick. Trevor, the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you, Martin. I think it's really positive that you've actually taken the initiative to gather a number of potential applicants for this project. All too often, it is a process which features a lot of competition and who's best and so on. And I think it's really nice to have this idea of looking collectively at processes and projects and the role of culture, because the things one learns during a cultural capital project are precisely things which can change or transform any place. So I think as a learning exercise, it's really good, and I really hope one can get into a situation where it's not a question of just one you might say winner or chosen, and 8 or 9 losers, but everybody can perhaps win from the process. And although it's very late in the first round, I think people have to submit their applications in the start of June, which only leaves us about 2 months. Anyway, I think it would be really what I'll try to do is to put some perspectives on how you might approach these 2 months, but also particularly how you might look at the next phase. So, okay, I'm going to share my screen now. And all right, yeah, mind the gap. I mean, it's just a sort of maybe that's the first joke, or the only joke actually, but it's the gap. Of course, it's the gap between many things. One is between the rhetoric and the actuality. One is the gap between now and then. We're in for a long process. And another gap is between what the citizens want and what the politicians want. That's another gap to watch out for. And then there's a gap between overestimating and promising and delivering. So there are many gaps. But let's go on. In a way, this idea of capital of culture seems to be a bit sort of outworn. I mean, the idea of being a capital of culture. I mean, I think we're really into another sort of a framework now of mindset. We're talking about cultural capital and how cultural capital is essentially in any kind of transformatory processes of society, and in this context, particularly cities, regions, neighborhoods. So I think the idea of cultural capital is really relevant. And cultural capital is not necessarily financial capital. One of the most important aspects of cultural planning is the realization that resources, knowledge, memory, connections, narratives, whatever, are really important as cultural capital. And of course, part of that is money, finances, but definitely not the whole part of it. So we have 66 cities who have actually tried to do this since 1984. How culture and the city can act and react together. And this unique synergy can open up, change the everyday, and open up for new partnerships, new futures. Not every city has been successful. Not every project is successful, but it really is important to put the bar quite high and to try to achieve. What I think is really important is that this program is quite open, and in fact, it really does demand that you find your own position, your own motivation, and your own profile in the context of Europe. And naturally, after 66 attempts, it gets difficult each year, but this is the main challenge. Options are closing down, but also times are changing and options are opening up. So you can learn from many cities, but you can copy nobody. So you must really look at this DNA, which has been also talked about before. What is special for the city, the year, and the people engaged? So if you're going to find your own role, these are some of the cities which I quite liked. In a way, there are many ways of looking at this, and we don't have to go into it. It's just about actually how they will be remembered. And being remembered is part of it. Planning is not just about looking forward. Planning is also being able to put yourself in the future and look back. In a way, switching the time frames and the focus. What do we want to be remembered? Well, what was the corner we turned? What was the threshold we jumped to? So these are some of the ideas. But what will your city, well, that's a flaw, but your city show us? What has it to offer? What will it be? Timing is everything. And because the cultural capital is set for 27, does this mean that it's the right time of your city? It's like a sort of a runway. You know, at one point you have to leave, partly because the runway gets shorter, partly because you're up into enough revolutions that actually the time is taken to lift off. But is this lift off at the same time for every city? No, it's not. Some cities, perhaps the right time would have been 5 years ago. Some would be in 25 years. Some will maybe never come. Is the time right? And I think really choosing this, whether it's really right to apply and really what to apply with and why, is a question of, is it the right time for your city? Are you prepared? And also another thing, how do you relate to time? Can your city reflect our time now? And our time now is not my time in 6 years or 7 years. How do we reflect the time so it's not already passé when it actually happens? And how will the imprint of time impact on the project? ECOC has changed quite a lot. You know, it was very simple programs, and now it's very much this ethos of cultural planning, or you might say from cultural events to culturally driven integrated actions. It's not just the planning department and, you know, the planning committee. It's the cultural committee, it's the education committee, it's the integration committee, it's the infrastructure committee, it's the social committee, it's the internet, whatever. You know, it really is an integrated action to change. And from a 1 year perspective, we have now a decade as a perspective, 5, 6, 7 years before, 5, 6, 7, 8 years afterwards. So this is the time frame you're working in. And it's gone from a project for the city, delivering for the city, for the enjoyment of, for the promotion of, but now it's with the city and even it's by the city. So how do you do this? How do you change the perspective from being not for, but actually with and by? So in a way, this is a kind of testing ground for the belief that the city is a creative cultural phenomena. And it opens up our way of understanding, planning, organizing our cities. And it has this power because it's not limited by formal organizations. You can organize it in another way. You can step outside the do's and not do's and the haves and not haves and the formalities. You can create a different set of mindset, but also a different, let's say, organizational mindset to actually work on this and re-engage the whole city in a process. And a very important thing is that is the city able to, or how do you actually change, not by being a city in Europe? You are no longer a city in Europe. You will be a European city. And what does this mean? By being a European city and not just a city in Europe. So what are the motivations? Yeah, everybody has always wanted more attraction, more attraction, more attraction. More tourists and visitors, higher level of cultural provision in most cities, higher quality of urban life, some cities, culturally led urban generation, some cities. Increased opportunities for artists, yes, most cities. Stimulating the creative industries, yes, some cities. More perhaps in the 90s and the zeros than now. To link the city with the region, more and more a question of the times. European collaboration, yes, but are we honest about it? How do we want to collaborate with Europe, and who with, and what do we want to get out of it? And more perhaps an integrated and open city, looking at the agendas, the political agendas and reality of the zeros, the tens, and now the 20s in Europe. Opportunity to work transsectorial and create new alliances in the city. Engaging the city, engaging them and creating models of public participation. Creating a stronger identity and citizenship. Reflecting diversity, yes. Making radical experiments, some. Public debate, reflection, perhaps. The address of migration, rural, urban, global, shrinking cities, increasingly important, and climate and sustainability. So what are the weaknesses of your city? Where do you want to put the accent? What is important for you? Not everything, but what is really important? So what trends can we see? We can see from, as I said, from cultural events to cultural processes and to problem solving. It's really important that you are honest and also address your weaknesses. You have to be hyper self-critical, and you have to be aware that you are not doing this because you are the best or the most wonderful or the oldest or the most royal or whatever. You actually will win it because you need to go from level 1 to level 5, and you can see how this might happen. So we are looking at problem solving, issue solving. We're looking from the short term to the long term, from the planned and control programs to open and responsive processes, and from cultural sector to cultural integration. These are some of the themes which are dominating now. And from clear individual responsibility to shared responsibility. And from cultural infrastructure, which may be necessary or may not, but it really is not about that. It's from cultural platforms and cultural ecosystems. So these are the kind of frames and these are the kind of terms you ought to be looking at when you're formulating your application, your ideas. And you're going from information to communication. And the targets are from communities as targets to communities as basis for action. It really is bottom up, although it sounds a cliche, but how do you activate that? And how do you define communities? Communities are not necessarily the same as neighborhoods. They may be, but they may be also gender communities. They may be also elderly communities. They also may be youth as a community. How do you define communities? Or they may be refugees as communities. What are the communities? So what are your main challenges when looking at this kind of project? The greatest competitor is yourself and not the other candidate cities. I really believe this. Don't worry about what the others are doing. Don't look at them and start being critical and start copying. Just look at your own self. Keep it authentic, keep it real, and keep it true. Be clear of your motivations and why do you need this so-called title? You don't need the title. Well, if you do, it's the wrong way of doing it. What you need is the opportunity to do something different, to do something you've never been able to do. So why do you need this? Be clear of your motivations. But also, what do you have to offer? What do you have to offer both the citizens, but also the project, the European Capital of Culture, and also the time? What do you have to offer? And also the situation, the context. Do not underestimate the long process. It really is one thing to hold speeches, one thing to promise. Another thing is to keep a team together for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years, to make sure that there's a political backing for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years, to make sure that the cultural sector really is behind you in this process. So the process is actually the core, the spine, the skeleton of the whole project. Identify your conflicts, identify your gaps, and address them. Develop a real process and a real live project. Yeah, this should have been talked about maybe a year ago when you started, or 2 years ago, or 3 years ago. I really hope you're not starting now, because if you're starting now, don't do it. Don't just write something as though it's an application for a job. Don't just write something as though you feel you have to because all the other cities are doing it. If there is no real process, if there is no real project, don't apply. Think of 10 years after, but mainly think of the year after the cultural capital. This is where it falls down. Everybody can program a year probably, but what about the year after, the morning after, the what now, the where do we go from here? Think of that. It's really important to think about the year after. And as I said, cultural capital is more important than capital of culture. How do you assess what is your cultural capital? How do you want to build the cultural capital? The process must make a difference, really. The process is changing minds. It's creating alliances. It's making people aware. It's making people understand also where they are, what they're doing, and what the city is they have. And how to engage relevant departments in the city, perhaps by engaging a task force and working across the board. So, as I said, this is not about just, you have to create a project and not just to write a bid. You have to build an independent platform between the local authorities and civil society. Somehow you have to bridge this gap. Somehow you have to make this project also something which is not just wanted from the town hall, but also wanted and increasingly loved by the citizens. That will take time. How do you create such a platform? Who do you ask to be there? And how will you govern it? Essential questions. But anyway, need to have is better a starting point than nice to have. What do you need to have? What do you really think this project is going to change in your city? Transparency has been touched on. You must really commit to transparency. You must really build trust. You must make sure that stakeholders are committed and you're building from the outside, but building from the inside. But references, of course, and critique from the outside are necessarily, but you're building from the inside. Dare to think out of the box and dare to think some things, include some things which are perhaps entirely, you might say, entirely different, very radical. Dare to challenge the concept of the cultural capital, in fact. And the last question, does Europe need another cultural capital? I don't know. I'll let the European Union decide that. So, and this is going very quickly because I really wanted to have some time for a sort of chat afterwards. But as you're in this first round, there are some things you have to have in place to be taken seriously in the first round, not the second round. We go further than that. A cultural strategy you have to have. I have never seen a cultural capital be appointed without them having a cultural strategy in place. If it's not in place now, you have to promise to have it in the second round. The reasons and motivations have to be absolutely clear, and they have to absolutely clear and understandable. And you also must be able to formulate what you see as changing in the city. And this is not, I would say, the idea of cultural planning, yes, but it's more about cultural visioning. What do you see as the change? What do you see on the horizon? What do you want? How do you think your city will be in 5, 10 years? What is the motivation? A clear idea and a clear will to create an independent structure. Independent structure. They will keep on asking about this. How do you make sure that the director or the directors will be independent? How do you make sure that the organization will be balanced, that it be strong enough, that it can create its own, you might say, program and so on? But you will also make sure that there is a clear commitment to support the project economically. As you know, this is no gold mine to be part of it, to win a ECOC title. Most of the funding is local, maybe national, maybe regional, and perhaps some European money will be thrown in. But what you get from the start is actually quite limited as regards a budget from the European Union. So there has to be a commitment and understanding that you support the project financially. And you have to make sure this is not a party political project. You have to make sure there's a cross-party political support at local and regional level. This has to be true and not something just the mayor says. It has to be also something which you can point to, quotations, votings in the chamber, and so on. This has to be really, really solid. Then you also have to make sure the cultural sector understands this project and is behind you. I mean, they are the ones that are having to lead this project. They must not feel as though you are prioritizing this project and not prioritizing them and all the other projects they have. So you have to make sure you engage them and that they are fully behind. Refer to concrete initiatives they have taken in the process, they will take, they are committing to. You must show there are signs of including citizens and civil society already at the first stage. It may be not fully developed, but you must show signs of workshops, seminars, projects, programs, small grant schemes, concrete things which you can say these are happening and these are happening because and will feed into our project. So refer to concrete initiatives. And at the first stage, yes, you have to have a program concept and structure, but don't spend too much time making programs or making a program or finding highlights and things. You need a concept for the program and you need a structure at that stage. And a simple, realistic budgeting, financing plan at this stage. So those are in a super quick sort of, I'm back, I think.
Yes, you're back.
It was really a whiz through, and but I'd rather have some questions and some pointers. We can go anywhere you want to go, if that's okay with you, Martins.
Yeah, sure. Actually, I'd like you to answer a few of my questions first.
Okay.
I have the prerogative of this point. First question is, well, it's more like a comment of your presentation, and it was very rich, and it was every single thing you said is a great lesson to learn, and I think every single bit of your presentation was worth every second.
Don't overdo it.
But for some, this might be too much. So what would be the very first step for the municipalities or even for the organizations not willing to candidate for the European Capital of Culture title, but anyone? What would be the first step? Would it be like a meeting? Would it be a mailing list to start talking about something? What would be the very first thing for people to try being cultural cities?
Well, I mean, you can do it in many ways, but I think it's really important to get outside City Hall and to do something in the public space and to do something where you are open and it's a creative. It could be a tea party. It could be a street event. It could be whatever. It doesn't really matter what it is. It could be a project on memory and so on, so on, so on, so on. It's not the question of what it is. It's the attitude. And it's how you step outside the formal structure and how you invite people to take part and be a creative element. So I think it's that. I think it's a stepping out and actually engaging, opening up, and trying to find a new platform. And the public space is a great space to do this. So I think public space becomes critical, both in the fact that it's the physical public space, but also the media public space. I think that's really, really important. And I think it's also important to look at that people can see change happening and not just hope it's going to be a lovely program in 5 years, but see that change is happening on the way. They must feel that things are changing, that the change process can be seen, it can be felt, it can be noted, even if it's small and incremental. So you have to have a sense that we're going in the right directions. There has to be a response, an immediate thing, doing some things which are very quickly to do and manageable and are not huge infrastructures or iconic architecture or big sporting events. Don't do it. Small, here and now, change, and we're all there together.
So basically getting down to earth in a political context.
Yeah, and not talking so much about things, but actually just doing things together. I think it's the doing it, the not planning it, but doing it is really important. Whether it's urban gardening or whether it's a project with elderly about memories of the city or whatever it is, just doing it, show examples of what you want to do. And from that will inspire people and get people involved.
Another great lesson, I think, would be crucial to several candidates, both in Latvia and in Portugal, would be that the candidates should learn from previous examples and not copy them. And that I think that's pretty important. But also maybe you can recall any city that were willing to copy other city, and pretty much it turned out to be a great disaster. Would there be any town? Would there be any city from your experience that tried this method to copy paste some great success story into their location and it never really worked?
I think the ones that are, you might say, copying were not given titles. I think it became very obvious in the selection process that these were shifted out. So I think actually it's not the case of any of the cultural capitals, but many of the I mean, in Italy there was, I think, in 1 year 42 applicant cities. I mean, it's ridiculous because if you looked at those bids, they were so standardized, as they also used script writers. They also used advisors, so-called advisors, who have been doing these things for many years. It became a really standardized product in which there are hit words and hit phrases that were used. So I think those were fortunately sorted out. So I think it's more in that process. So what I mean is, if you really don't feel you have something unique to offer, and you really don't need the project, don't apply because many others are applying and you feel you have to.
We have a question from Lelda Ineka. What angle would you suggest as a first approach to a stakeholder whose interest is financial gain? How to sway them towards understanding long-term impact, the statistics, tangible results, or less numbers, more emotion? So the question about stakeholders whose interest is financial gain.
Yeah, I mean, this is not unusual. When I started on the process for Copenhagen in '96, it's a long time ago, but at that point Copenhagen was broke. It was broken. It had an unemployment of 14%, and the city was under the state control for finances because it was bankrupt. And I had meetings with all kinds of investors. Because I realized that unless the investors were to start to build hotels and stuff like this, the city would never change. And at the first meeting, they were complaining that actually that this was just a figment of the imagination. Copenhagen would never be a tourist destination, and this was the rhetoric. What happened was that we actually we involved them in the process and didn't ask them to make any commitment, but actually got them involved in the process. And they committed to a process. Through the process, they changed their perspective and changed their minds. And I think this identification and seeing the long term gradually made for them more and more sense. So I think including people in processes rather than asking them to make decisions on a purely factual or financial basis on a spreadsheet thing is really important. And not to talk money. The first 3 years we didn't mention money. Nobody mentioned money. We mentioned a lot of other things, but money was not talked about. In the end, money was not a problem. So I think if you engage people, engage with their ideas, their visions, even people who want to make money have visions and ideas and concepts. So I don't think it should be a divisive thing. I think it really must be an inclusive thing, but don't start with the things that can divide.
And since I have a feeling that you, and also probably some other participants have a feeling that you did not fully answer the question by Zana Estere asked to Emils, maybe I can repeat again and you can help finding the answer to this. So the question was, how did you, in this case it was to Emils, but I guess you can refer to yourself too. How did you build and provide communication and continuity of a dialogue between all three key players during the process of project development and implementation? So, how to build and provide communication and continuity of a dialogue between the city, citizens, and culture artists in this case?
It's not easy. I think you have to put again the actual project, what you're doing, the actual physical project, what you're doing at the center, at the core. Of course, what I've done and what we do also in this is that there is, of course, regular, you might say, feedback to the city, and at some levels, regularly every 3 months, every 6 months, feeding back to the city, make sure everybody is informed. Also, at the neighborhood council level, at local politicians, local associations, find a way of doing it regularly. But the best way actually to do it is to make sure that there is engagement in the actual project, and they are there on the ground, in the space, and in the place, and taking part. So I think this again of engaging at the point of contact, interaction, because what you do with cultural projects, you create an alternative decision-making environment. You create a soft decision-making environment, an informal decision-making environment, and you should include people around in that, because then the formal decisions will also probably be more positive and will happen anyway. It's not trying to impact formal decision-making. It's not trying to impact financial decision-making of boards and so on. It's actually trying to get people around, you might say, the campfire and around the local situation. Through that, change mindsets, understanding, whatever, and then processes will happen. So I think the project has to develop its own strategy of communications. For example, in Riga, one of the projects decided to work with a newspaper and work with the newspaper as a forum for contact and information. That was for both residents, artists, and politicians. So I think something like that. There's also another project in Riga which works as a festival, and they, of course, have another dynamic. So it became the festival as a meeting point, which actually became the most important communication point. So don't, in a way, try to disassociate or look at communication apart from activities and apart from decision-making, but see it as an integrated project.
I think it again goes back to the same thing I mentioned previously, getting down to earth. So I believe the dialogue can only be fruitful when all the stakeholders look at each other as equals.
It's true. It's absolutely
true. That is
true.
the point of dialogue. So I think it's not like going down to someone else's level, but trying to be at the same level, and this is where the dialogue is created. And I think this is to be learned from all three stakeholders, both politicians and also both artists or organizations. And I think this could also very much work when constructing a better dialogue between the stakeholders, just trying to be equal and trying to understand each other.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions from the chat section? I see that there are none for now, but I hope that, Trevor, you'll be around for the next following presentation. So if there are some questions coming through, then I will try to answer them. I'll try to ask you them on the way.
Yep.
So thank you, Trevor, for giving us this wonderful presentation. And we are going next to the final, last but not least, presentation from Hans-Peter Dein. And he is a teaching associate professor and director of Center for Cultural Evaluation at Aarhus University. He has been involved in various projects of applied research within the fields of communication, culture, and sociology. From 2013 up to 2018, he was the evaluation manager at Rethink Impact 2017, responsible for the research-based evaluation of the impact of Aarhus 2017, when the city was also the European Capital of Culture. And his presentation is titled Case Study Aarhus ECOC 2017. So hello, Hans-Peter. And the stage is yours.
Thank you. And I'll share my screen. I hope you can see it right now. Yeah, the research-based evaluation of Aarhus 2017. As you said, I am, just a minute, then it would change. So I am heading this Center for Cultural Evaluation, which is part of the university, Aarhus University. And you could say that it's actually a kind of a legacy from the Aarhus 2017 program, as it is a spin-off from the project organization that was established for the evaluation. So actually, this is just one of many examples of what can come from being a capital of culture. But what I will be talking about is the evaluation of Aarhus 2017. And since we've been today been hearing about how to plan an ECOG, some might say, well, isn't it a bit too early to talk about the evaluation? And my response to that would be no, not at all. How to follow the ECOG, how to evaluate the ECOG should be part of the initial thoughts and the design process as well. So what I'll be talking about is a bit how we did it in Aarhus, how was the evaluation designed, a few results just to inspire you and give an impression of what we evaluated. And then based on this, give you some recommendations on how you could do this in your cities. To start, just a brief introduction to the Aarhus 2017 project. Actually, Aarhus 2017 was not just a city of culture or a capital of culture, it was the entire region, the central Jutland region that was part of this project and supporting it, even though Aarhus was the name of the city or the capital. This project started back in 2007, which is actually the timing of this administrative region being born. Denmark today has 3 levels of administrative layers. You have the national state, you have the municipalities, and in between you have 5 different regions. And this structure was born in 2007. So it's actually, it was there right from the beginning when the first thoughts about being an ECOG started. Aarhus was nominated in 2012, and the year itself, of course, was in 17, and then the wrapping up and closing and publishing the evaluation was in 2018. The program consisted of 628 events and had in total 3.3 million audience visits. And part of this was to conduct a research-based evaluation. This was not carried out by the ECOG body, the foundation themselves. It was actually done more or less by the university in a partnership with the ECOG Foundation. And that's what I'll say a little bit more on this slide. This strategic partnership was formed between the foundation and the university. It was established as a project organization, primarily staffed, or more or less staffed with university employees. We had a few part-time employees from the political civic servants level, but primarily with university employees, partly to ensure that this was an independent evaluation. Actually, this partnership was suggested already in the bid book, but it wasn't as such established until after the nomination. So we came into this process in the spring of 2013. And looking at other ECOGs, this is fairly early. It seems much worse, as in it's seen that this evaluation perspective would appear much later in the process elsewhere. But at the same time, I would say it could have been even better, because since we were not part of the developing process, it gave us a few challenges. For instance, regarding baseline data. If we wanted to make a baseline on, say, civic engagement, we were too late, because a lot of the civic engagement, as Trevor was talking about. Trevor was heading the development of this project. A lot of the civic engagement took part in the years up to the nomination. So we couldn't get a baseline on the civic engagement since it had already changed during this process in especially 2011, as far as I remember. But also a baseline regarding the collaboration between sectors and cultural institutions. We were a bit too late to get a baseline study of that, because they had also started collaborating when we started the evaluation and the data gathering. Another challenge was related to the evaluation criteria. Bid books in general are full of dreams, and I think they should be. This bid book as well. There were 6 overall goals formulated in the bid book for Aarhus 2017. But as you often see, those goals are very fluffy, very much open for interpretation. And it's not that clear what's to be held accountable for. Actually, the only very clear example of the opposite I've seen is the city of Leeuwarden in 2018. They were very specific upfront in the bid book on how they wanted to evaluate and what the evaluation criteria should be. That might be because Holland or the Netherlands have a quite strong tradition on evaluation. So maybe that's why they were very specific. But this gave us some, not problems, but challenges as to the baseline data and what to evaluate, which evaluation criteria to follow up on. This partnership, this project organization, which was called Rethink Impacts 2017, and the overall theme of Aarhus 2017 was Rethink. But this project organization had actually 2 main focuses. The one being the evaluation itself, which is what I'll be talking about today. But we also were heading about 15 to 20 different research projects, depending on how you count them. This was part of the reason why the university wanted to engage and co-fund the evaluation, as a way to inspire the university employees to do research projects on ECOG, being an ECOG, and the impacts of such a strategy. Our evaluation, it came in 2 phases, or with 2 purposes, you could say. During the development of the program, we had a more formative role, trying to help and inspire the ECOG Foundation on how to do this, how to improve their approach, how to do it different. And then at the completion of the project, looking back, summative, and making the final report saying what happened, were the goals met, was it worth it, and so on. And this dual purpose, dual perspective can always be a challenge, because doing the formative part, helping people, telling them what to do better, it's difficult to get the intimacy between the evaluator and the ones being evaluated, when they know that in a year from now you will be the ones telling us if we were doing good or bad, and you'll be the hard teacher giving us the grades. And so we had a little difficulty handling this 2-phase strategic purpose. Doing the evaluation, we were, of course, gathering a lot of data, and we split the responsibility for this with the ECOG Foundation. It was very clear that the ECOG Foundation needed specific kinds of data on a day-to-day or more or less day-to-day basis, for instance, on the economy, whereas the more long-term data what we would call the evaluation data was something that we at the university and as evaluators were interested in. So we were doing all the interviews, the questionnaires and stuff like that, whereas the ECOG Foundation was responsible for the more day-to-day monitoring data. And that was actually a very, very good way to split up the responsibility for the data gathering. And just to give you an impression of how thorough this evaluation was, we were gathering data from the audiences, from the cultural institutions, from the politicians and civil servants, from the citizens in general, from sponsors, from the ECOG body, from the volunteers contributing to the ECOG project, and from the media. And in most cases, we did this before, during, and after the 2017 year. So we started data gathering in 2015, and we stopped gathering data in mid-2018, so that we were following the citizens' perspective and so on for half a year after the completion of this ECOG year. And all of this ended up in a main evaluation report, which is available in English. And I will give you a very few results today, but also in 7 thematic reports emphasizing different perspectives. But all these are only in Danish, so they might not be that interesting for you. This was a brief overview of how we organized it. And now I'll give you a few selected, or you could say random, results. First of all, because it seems a bit strange to present an evaluation without giving results, but also to inspire you, give you inspirations as to what could be evaluated, how could you do it, and also what would be relevant or realistic goals for an ECOG? At least I'll have a few examples on what you maybe couldn't expect from an ECOG. First theme I'll touch upon is the collaborations, which is actually the area of impacts where we probably see the most significant impacts, at least in the case of Aarhus 2017. The collaboration perspective started already in the development phase with the engagement of the public preparing for the bids, but also during the year they were contributing as volunteers within the program and at specific events. Another kind of collaboration that was developed during this ECOG project was the collaboration between the municipalities. As I said, this region was established in 2017, but during this more or less 10-year period from 2007, when the first thoughts were thought, until the ECOG year, these 19 municipalities grew. A common sense of belonging grew among the municipalities and the citizens. They learned how to collaborate and exchange ideas and use one another's strengths and so on. We also saw a lot of collaboration between the cultural institutions and the local artists. Developing the program. Actually, 80% of the program was produced by local artists and institutions. And usually these were produced in collaborations between 2 or more artists or institutions. And in a lot of cases, they also had international partners involved. So collaboration was a big thing in the Aarhus 2017, and we could see that in a lot of areas. Another area of the evaluation was the media coverage, and I'll give you a few selected results from there. We saw a quite extensive coverage in the news media. However, we saw it primarily in the local and regional media. Of course, this was mentioned in the national media as well, but not as much as we maybe could have hoped for, and at least not as much as the local and regional media was interested. A way to see how the citizens really engaged and took this ECOC serious and took pride in it was the amount of hashtags used and the way these hashtags was used, for instance, on Instagram. Very often you saw people posting pictures of themselves, using different kinds of Aarhus 2017 hashtags, and picturing themselves taking part in cultural events or being next to cultural artifacts, and in a lot of different ways associating themselves to culture. It was quite clear that during 2016, 17, beginning of 18, more and more people were proud to show, I'm a cultural citizen, I'm taking part of this, I see myself as a cultural individual. But also the awareness of Aarhus being an ECOC was very big, we believe. A lot of people were aware that we held the title. If we look at the attitude or the tone in the media coverage, it was generally very positive. 2/3 of all media coverage had a positive perspective on the ECOC project, and only 9% had a negative attitude. When there was a negative attitude, it usually had to do with some of the organizational turmoil that occurred during these years, or it was questions raised like, is it worth it? What do we get for all these money? And then the third part of criticism was related to a few provocative cultural events. And you could even say that negative media coverage following a provocative event is not necessarily a bad thing. It's actually part of what they try to stimulate with these kinds of events. So, yeah. Another area would be the program itself and the audience for the program. And what we could see was that in general, there was an overrepresentation of the well-educated compared to the educational level of the citizens in the region. We could also see that there was a overrepresentation of women. And these two results are not at all surprising. In Denmark, you'd usually say that the cultural spectators for cultural events would be middle-aged women teaching in the school or something like that. So this is not at all a surprise. What's actually a little surprise is that there was no significant bias on age groups. We actually saw a fair amount of young people and people in their 30s, as well as people over 50. Since this was a project taking place not only in Aarhus, but also around the region, in the cities around the region, accessibility and geographic accessibility was one of the things we were looking at. And we could see that no matter where this event took place, it was mostly local people. 2/3 of the audiences were from the local municipality, being Aarhus if it was here, or being Herning or whatever city it took place in. So most of the audiences came from the local area. And a little disappointing, only 10 to 16% of the audience came from outside the central Denmark region. We could have thought or hoped for a little more than that. But it seems that there's a long way from Copenhagen to Aarhus, even though it's a small country. Regarding economic accessibility, about half of the events were free of charge. And when we compared the paid events with the free events, we could see that the free events the events being free had an impact on the age profile and the educational profile, as to more young people attending the free events and more people with short or no education attending the free events. Another quite significant impact was the impact on the role of culture. On a political level, you could say that there was no increased prioritization of culture. These figures show that during this decade, more or less, from 2007 to 18 actually, cultural expenditures per capita did increase. They increased by 4%, but that wasn't even enough to keep pace with the total expenditures per capita. So you could say that even though the cultural sector got more money during this period, it actually didn't get as much more as it should have if you compare it to all other areas of public expenditures. And actually, this Central Denmark region was doing quite bad on this compared to at least 3 of the 4 other regions in Denmark. Only the Copenhagen area did worse than the Central Denmark region area. So this, being an ECOG and being a region involved in being an ECOG didn't really stimulate the prioritization of culture. But it certainly did have quite big impact when we were interviewing the politicians and the civil servants. Before the ECOG project, the cultural civil servants often had to ask all the other civil servants and politicians, please remember the cultural perspective, please incorporate us when you develop new projects and so on. Whereas during this decade, it kind of changed. It ended up so that when a new building housing plan or a new plaza was developed or whatever, the technical civil servants actually came to the cultural civil servants and asked, well, we're doing this project. Shouldn't we think about the cultural perspectives before we develop this? So the roles kind of changed and everybody wanted to incorporate the cultural perspective in their daily routines. Asking the citizens of the region afterwards, there was more or less a full backing for being an ECOG. We asked them if it was a good decision, and we asked them in 2018. We also asked them during the prior years, but this is the most interesting thing, that after the completion of the year, still 2/3 of the citizens thought, yes, it was a good idea to be an ECOG. It was worth it in every way. So this was just a few reports. If you want more, you can just Google Rethink Impacts 2017 main report, or if these slides are shared, you can use the link I've put up here. But it's quite easy to find our report. It's in English and you can look it up. But I'll finalize with a few recommendations. You can see that Martins is making himself prepared to take over. A few recommendations. First of all, don't forget or don't neglect to incorporate the evaluation perspective from the start. And that means already in the bid process and the bid book. Actually, our impression is that the EU Commission seems to emphasize evaluation more and more also in the bid books and showing how you want to do this. And you should address questions like who's responsible for the evaluation? Should we do it ourselves? Should we hire someone for it? If we should hire someone for it, should it be a private organization, or should we try to team up with the local university or something like that? And of course, my recommendation is that, and I've seen a lot of these evaluations over the years, and those teaming up with local universities or likewise seem to do quite well. Then again, how should it be organized? Should it be like here with a strategic partnership, or how would you do it? And what are the main evaluation criteria? Not that you have to detail them up front, but you have to at least think not just in goals, but also in evaluation criteria. And this is kind of a balance, because a bid book is about dreaming big, and it should be about dreaming big. But I think you should also set up a few realistic evaluation criteria. And by realistic, I also mean they should be measurable, they should be achievable. And just an example here. Being an ECOG might very well, it's supposed actually to put you on the map international, and it's supposed to attract tourists, and it probably will. Well, I can't say during this Corona times if it does these years, but usually it will. But this doesn't mean that you should expect the audiences for the cultural events to be international. In general, at least in Aarhus, we saw the audience was not international, but there were lots of visitors here. And then get advice from someone who's done it before. We gained a lot from talking to the people from Liverpool 08 and other ECOGs about how to do this. And then last slide. Don't forget the long perspective. Have a legacy strategy. I've seen way too many ECOGs without a legacy strategy, or with a legacy strategy developed 5 days before closing the project or something like that. Think about it early. Legacy is not just something that is happening. It has to be incorporated in your overall strategy. And you shouldn't, I think this is in line with what Trevor said before. You shouldn't see this as just a one-year project. This is a project for a decade. The years up to the year itself, but also the years after the ECOG year. Yes, I think that was it. Feel free to mail me if you...
Yeah, thank you, Hans Peter. Can you just keep the presentation on and maybe skip a slide back? Because I have a question about this. I had the luxury to speak with several bidders of the title in Latvia. And when talking about the potential candidacy of 2027, I suggested them to focus on 2030. Because this very much reflects to the legacy aspect, that the cultural capital doesn't end when it ends according to the calendar, but it, like you said, it starts something new. Don't you think this is crucial also to think about the future after the Capital of Culture is over? And what are your own observations in Aarhus since 4 years have passed? What has changed? What has started? What have your own professional insights into this, or occupations into this? So yeah, the two questions is, basically one question is, what are your observations about Aarhus after, well, 4 years after the Capital of Culture status? And what should us learn from it? Or what have you learned from it?
Well, first of all, being a university employee, I'm hesitant to say this is what's happening 4 or 5 years after without the necessary data. So I have to make a disclaimer and say what I'm suggesting now is only my feelings about how it is. We don't have data as such on the impacts 5 years later. We hope we're doing that. But my impression is that especially I emphasized the collaborations as one of the main impacts from the ECOG year itself. But my impression is also that these collaborations stay on. They are still a lot of cultural institutions and local actors are still collaborating in very different ways. The collaboration between the cultural sector and the political sector has strengthened. The collaborations, as I mentioned, within the political administration has strengthened. So I think a lot of that is still staying. Yeah, so that's I see that that some of the main impacts are actually staying 4 years later. But I also have a feeling that Aarhus could have done a bit more on securing the legacy. It seems more of a coincidence than a deliberate result that these impacts are still here 4 years later.
There was another slide I'd like to return, but before that, we have published the research titled Impact 2017, Aarhus 2017, before, during, after. That is the PDF that you were mentioning. And it's in a chat section for those who are interested to see it right now. You can follow the link. And also in the chat section, I wrote a question: can you tell us which bidder cities or other locations are you representing as a participant? So while we are trying to go back to the actual slide, you can write down the name of cities so we know which cities are looking forward to cultural planning. But to Hans-Peter, I'd like you to return to a slide about main evaluation report. It was a slide where it was the title, I guess it was something like that. Yeah, there it is. So yep. This was done post factum. So these sort of things that you came up to in post factum. But I think, or don't you think, these are also important and valuable, or these 7 thematic points are valuable to look at before bidding, because they don't change. These are still very important elements.
Well, first of all, I think you're right. These 1+7 reports were written during 2018, which is 1 year after the completion. But looking back right now, in hindsight, I would say, maybe we shouldn't even have done those 7 thematic reports, because they have had a quite limited audience, I believe. I do not know, but my feeling is that there might have been 8 civic servants who has been reading the report on the political and administrative perspective. There might have been 5 cultural institutions or so. It might have been more, but it's not that they've had that much of an impact. The main impact came from the overall, the main report. So that was one comment to that. But your question was, shouldn't we have put more effort to the process during the years, during the development of the ECOG?
Yeah, and basically keep in mind these 7 points, that if you want to be a good capital of culture, you need to think about not only program and audience, but also about business community, organization perspective, everything that is mentioned in the slide.
Yeah. And actually it relates to this formative, summative purpose I was talking about. Because you could say that what we did in Aarhus was that we tried to incorporate this formative perspective, giving advice, giving preliminary results in 2013, 14, 15, 16. But we only did that. We only gave that to the ECOG body. We didn't have that much of a close relation to the cultural institutions, for instance. And part of it might be our fault, but part of the explanation would also be that they are, during this process, they are really heavily burdened with developing whatever they are doing. So they don't really feel that they have, they maybe would benefit from it, but they don't feel that they have the capacity to take in new perspectives or so. So it's quite difficult to get to have a dialogue about this when they are fed up with developing their specific events or whatever they are doing.
We are returning back to the legacy question, and we have a request from Zana Esther to probably suggest, from your experience and evaluation, what would be suggestions regarding the matter that can be better addressed to the expectation management, evaluation planning, and predictability of the impact and legacy. What probably wasn't done right in Aarhus, and what would be suggestion to the potential candidates? So better addressed to the expectation management, evaluation planning, and predictability of the impact and legacy. So if we want to be cultural city after 2027, what should we keep in mind? I believe I understand this question like that.
First of all, again, both on the evaluation and the evaluation criteria, as well as on the legacy strategy, my recommendation would be to think about it, incorporate it as early as possible. In Aarhus, the legacy strategy was formulated very late, I would say. Actually, as far as I remember, in the late fall of 2017 or something like that, quite late. And especially you can have the hardcore legacy buildings or whatever, and of course they'll stay, hopefully, after the ECOG year. But the more soft legacy, like collaborations and stuff like that, that might disappear quite fast if you don't do something to facilitate it afterwards. One of the things that Aarhus did well was that this volunteer program that they set up for the ECOG, they found a way to keep that volunteer program running. They are now here as city hosts, and it's still going on in a way. The political administrative part kind of stayed was prolonged as the region established this central Denmark region of culture or something like that, which kind of took care of this collaboration within among the municipalities afterwards as well. Yeah, but I'm not sure if I answered the questions, but
I think the start thinking about it before it's time.
Yes, as early as possible.
It is important, yeah.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions from the chat section?
Can I just come in on that?
Yeah, Trevor, please.
Yeah. Yeah, thinking about it before is important, but it's also important to make sure that when the year ends, everything is not just dissolved. A tendency is, after the European Capital Cultures, depending on the situation, is that there is a very, very quick, you might say, unorganization, disbanding the organization, the structure, and there's a vacuum, a political vacuum, an infrastructural vacuum, and financial vacuum, which means normally the year after is on all parameters, if you measure it, relatively negative. And first, the year after that, again, the second or third year, things start to emerge again. There's a kind of a need to have a rest, sit back, recover, or whatever. And that's a very dangerous situation. So if you could build in a kind of also a commitment to partnerships, a commitment to working together, and also a commitment to budgets at some level, would be a huge advantage. So that's really, as I see it, because the organization was really stripped down to a very, very minimal number of people, and most of the key people move on. I mean, you get this shift of mindset of people are looking for jobs from the middle of the year of the cultural capital actually itself. You can see in all the cultural capitals, key people start moving on because they get tempted by others. So at the end of the year, there's only the people who have to be there, and it's probably about a dozen people who are left to sort of, do the cleanup. So this is really problematic. This is really problematic. The other is that I think perhaps the local authorities in this region could have perhaps taken on more responsibility for things like the evaluation, the ongoing evaluation, the documentation, which would have strengthened, I think, because they are the ones who are really interested in taking over again the legacy of the cultural capital. So I think perhaps keeping them more on board than expecting the organization itself, the foundation itself, to work. As Hans Peter said, they are fully engaged in delivering events and so on, and they probably don't have this in focus. Okay.
And I fully agree with what Trevor said. We've seen in a lot of cities that the year or the next couple of years after the ECOC itself, everybody is exhausted. Nobody attends cultural events anymore because they are so filled with impressions from the ECOC year. One of the things actually that, and yes, the other thing Trevor said was this about the staffing and people leaving even before the year has completed. One of the things Aarhus did quite well was that even though they had this interim organization, the ECOC Foundation, a part of the employees in this foundation was seconded from the municipality or the regional administration. And these people then went back to cultural positions within Aarhus municipality or the other municipalities, and they kept these experiences and this project alive afterwards, coming back to their ordinary jobs in the municipality.
While we have one more, basically the repetition of the previous question from Sanne Esther coming up, I think she will make it sound different. I wanted to read you a comment from Lieve Kreisler, who's also one of the participants, and she's also involved in the Urban Cultural Planning project. And it is regarding the collaboration question that we spoke with Trevor Davies previously about how to create a dialogue. And she says that we also have had individual pre-project meetings, interviews to secure stakeholders' viewpoints, see the different viewpoints and establish a momentum that, yes, we all want to have this project. And this works on all levels, municipal, intermediary, and also on citizen activist level. And this is one-on-one check, and it is important. And some things are not, some things are, however, also stakeholder meetings have been proven very beneficial in these demonstrator projects, and importantly that actual municipal partners are taking place in urban cultural planning, taking part in urban cultural planning, and it puts them in a very close collaboration with the artistic drivers. But they actually have to work together, and this has certainly built trust. And Riga is, at some point, a good case scenario that municipal partners are taking part of the project. They are not just delegators, observators, but they literally are one of the executioners of the idea. So do we have a question from Sanne, Reformed? If not, then probably...
May I just say it? Because
yeah, okay. But then be brief, yeah. So.
Yeah, I will be very brief and quick. Thank you for presentations. My point on the question was related, related with the citizen expectations, because that's one of the parts we also start from the very beginning. So how the citizen expectations can be better evaluated and maybe involved, engaged in this process that kind of also resonates in an impact and legacy at the end.
Maybe a couple of ideas here is that some cities anyway have established kind of citizens boards, in a way a kind of sounding board in which you can send out regularly for responses to certain things. in the build up, we already did in 2008, 2002 to 12, a series of investigations with the cities, kind of also focus groups and so on, looking at how different groups would view the cultural capital. And some of those were tagged on, some of those were like tracked, but not enough. So I think tracking opinions and tracking how opinions change and how people engage or don't engage, the tracking is really important. So I think as soon as you can do this, the better. But it's something which cities are becoming more and more aware of, and are beginning to establish. So I think this is the whole turn about how to, you might say, continually be in dialogue with cities, even sort of testing things. I remember we sent out testing ideas of how would you feel about more activities in the public space? How would you feel about more activities in the local cultural institutions? And all these kind of things actually informed our decision-making about what kind of program to actually structure. So I think building these more permanent dialogue, systems of dialogue is really, really important. Yeah.
And maybe I could add to that first of all, fear of the expectations shouldn't be the issue. The issue should be the citizens having expectations at all. Because if they don't have expectations, that means that they are not involved, they don't really care. So if they at least have some expectations, that's good. But of course, then next step would be that they don't get disappointed. And there's a balance between getting input, getting inspiration, and then on the other side, giving people the impression that they have a say. We met some civil citizens during the program period that said, oh, we are a bit disappointed because we came up with this great idea, but it didn't come into effect. So why didn't you listen to our very great idea? So that's the other side of it, that of course you shouldn't give them the impression that they decide, but that they can inspire and that they can come with inputs.
Well, that's an interesting option, because you talk about in participation, you have the ladder of participation, and in this ladder of participation, I think 7 or 8 different steps. One thing is actually the citizens do decide. Another thing is you inform them. Another thing is you ask them to advise and so on. But I think in a way it's a question of how much you dare to go and where do you dare to go. So I think rather than the consulting citizens or asking them to be inspiring, I think it really would be good in future cultural capitals to have some areas in which citizens are also able to self-organize and self-produce more and more. So I think this idea of ownership is not just about ownership ideologically or ownership politically, but actually ownership of projects. So I think that is really, really important to explore. And it's very, very different. I mean, not everything is the same, of course, but there must be opportunities where actually citizens can also activate. And so whether this is micro grants or whether it's neighborhood schemes or whether it's whatever, one can certainly do this. But of course, you can't just say it's one level, but you can do different kind of experiments. And I think more and more one is starting to work on that. And that certainly also happened in Aarhus, as it happens many other places. Some projects were really driven by, you might say, the popular voice or by local organizations. Others were, and this is again, the key in this is whether the cultural sector is ready for this, whether the cultural sector can actually stop identifying people as public and identify them as citizens. So when are you a citizen and when are you a public? When are you receiving stuff and when are you actually taking part in it? This is an incredible turn, and in these years it's really changing a lot. So really, but this would be one of the parameters I feel more and more after talking with several members of the kind of the committee who's like now responsible for the decisions the next few years of the ECOC. More and more this participatory thing is becoming key to them, as it is becoming more and more a major issue in society.
So if there are no further comments, that I would like to say huge thanks to Hans-Peter, to Trevor, and also to Emils for participating in this enormous journey that hopefully won't cause too much trauma to the participants. There's a lot of information and a lot of to learn. But this is not over, Royal. This event is over, and there are more to come. And as you can see on the shared screen, that there will be 2 more events on 23rd of April. It will be dedicated to artistic creation in public spaces, more focusing on Experience of Marseille, a European capital of culture in 2013, in cooperation with French Institute in Latvia, and that's basically in 10 days. So also look into the chat section, and there is the registration links. So you can already click on that and be prepared for the next time. And we also have another seminar coming up on 11th of May, Methods of Urban Planning Towards a Smarter and More Sustainable Society, in cooperation with Goethe Institute and Nordic Council of Ministers. If you think 11th of May fits you, then you can also register. In the chat section, there's a link. Apart from that, this seminar is over. It was titled Cultural Planning for Cultural Places, and it took place in cooperation with Danish Cultural Institute in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and the URB Cultural Planning Interreg project. The seminar was hosted by Ms. Data Mambad and financially supported by European Conservatives and Reformists Group, organized in partnership with UNIC Latvia, non-governmental organizations, Artsasis, and Cultural Lab. And all 3 seminars will have the same link, so you can use the same link as you use today. And if some part of this seminar was not available for you due to your own personal life, all webinars will be recorded and made available soon. So you can check out social media channels and also culturallab.com. Thank you very much. This is done, all right? Yes. So I hope there are important and crucial lessons to all of the participants, and especially to those who really would like to be either the capital of culture in 2027 or a cultural capital, as Trevor Davis said. So I hope that all of this will be useful. Thanks again, Hans-Peter. Thanks again, Trevor. And thanks, Emils. This is bye from me.